Practice leader for Univest Insurance HR Consulting. And I'm here today with Mona DelSole. Mona is a friend and a colleague, and she and I have done similar presentations in the past. I'm very pleased to be joined again. We're going to cover the topic of age bias today. And as we'll lay out as we go along, there are a lot of concerns around this, and it is a growing area of enforcement for the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But Mona has a lot of experience with age bias, age diversity in the workplace, and as her credentials suggest, she also does some leadership consulting, and she's a faculty member at Marywood University and for about the past 20 plus years. But previously, Mona did some speaking and teaching on the topic of diversity, how to lead and succeed in today's multi-generational business. That was for SCORE of the Lehigh Valley, Aging and Society, a course at Marywood University, as well as Integrity Across Generations, which we did together at DeSales University. So again, great to have Mona with us today. And before I turn it over to Mona, I just wanted to cover something quickly, just a couple of housekeeping issues. This is our statement from our compliance area, and I really just wanted to mention a couple of things here. One, we make every effort to have accuracy in what we say, what we tell you here, and what we show on our slides, which, by the way, will be available to everyone, as will the recording of this presentation after the close of the session. Usually they're available by around, I would say, Monday or so after. So we want to make sure you know that, first of all, this is being recorded, and that we're not here to provide legal advice. And if you do take action on anything we've said here, we urge you to get counsel as needed. We are going to have a Q&A available in the side panel, so if you have questions, you're welcome to ask them throughout the session, but we won't address them until the end. We promise to try to leave some time at the end for Q&A, and if we don't get to them, we'll be happy to follow up with you later. There is no chat feature on this today, so we did turn that off. It can get kind of confusing when we're trying to look at the Q&A. But excited to be with you. I'm going to turn it over to Mona now, and I will check back shortly with some Q&A. Take it away, Mona.
Thank you so very much, Jim. Thank you to your team, and thank you to Univest Insurance for having me here today. I'm so delighted and honored to collaborate with Jim Devine once again. We've had some incredible collaborations, and I feel that this is going to be another one. So thank you to the Univest team, and thank you all for joining us today. This is becoming a more talked about subject as we talk more about diversity, inclusion, and equity in the workplace. The one topic that we do not talk much about is age diversity. And we're going to share with you today why it's important. I'm going to paint the picture for you, what the multi-generational workforce looks like. And we're going to dig more deeply into some of the concerns that Jim will do a deep dive on. And I'm going to provide you with some opportunities or solutions to bridge the divide and maximize the benefits that we all can enjoy in our new multi-generational workplace. But before I do that, I would love to tell you why this topic is of such importance to me. As Jim mentioned in his very kind introduction, I teach at Marywood University. I teach health administration, aging issues in the School of Business and Global Innovation. And it just so happened I had to go to Marywood one summer afternoon a couple years back. But prior to doing that little jaunt up to Scranton, PA, I was here in the Lehigh Valley doing a communication training for an age diverse group, all different skill levels, all different ages. And it's about an hour and a half meeting that we had weekly. About halfway, we all stopped and we took a coffee break. And there were a couple women on the left side of the room talking away, and there were, a couple little corners of people gathered, and we very loudly overheard one of the women say, those millennials. And she said it loud enough where one of the millennials in the training on the other side of the room, who happened to be in technology, the head of the technology department, overheard it, looked at her, and I could sense the level of frustration that he was feeling. It was all over his face and in the tone of his voice when he asked her pointedly, "What do you mean?" So with that said, we completed our program that morning. I got in my car, drove to Scranton, and I thought, this is 30 student leaders getting ready to graduate from college and enter the workforce. And I'm really curious how they feel about the multi-generational workplace. So I asked them. Next slide, please. I asked them with what I would consider a very informal survey, considering this is an academic institution and it's not a formal research project. But I asked them, what did y'all think about the generations working together in the workplace? They were Gen Zs and a few millennials. And I asked them about the older generation. I asked them about how they felt about working with baby boomers. And the hands, they all went up. I can still picture it in my head in the auditorium. Many hands went up and many answers came out quickly. The students of the younger generation said this: they would like to be mentored by the older generations. They want to learn. They want to advance. The entire tone was positive. And I realized that there's such a disconnect and there's so much opportunity for us to lead and mentor and collaborate and grow as professionals and as an organization and maximize the benefits of this multi-generational workforce. However, there was work to be done. And this is just the starting point of those steps to make change. So Jim, the next slide, please. So you can find generational charts pretty much anywhere on the internet. I like the Pew Research Center, and this was one that I've used for many presentations on the multi-generational workplace. And Jim was kind enough to update this particular slide to show us that we are now looking at the millennial generation, those born from January to June 1981, as part of a protected class, which Jim is going to take a deeper dive into as we proceed here. But if you just take a look at, you're going to get these slides, so you don't have to memorize any of this, but just as a reference for you, the Generation Zs, they're age 22 and under, and you see born 1997. Millennials, age 23 to 38, actually 23 to 40. They're born 1981 and 96. Generation X, there's a lot of Generation X's out there that don't get talked about a lot, and we need to start that conversation as well. They're 39 to 54, born 65 to 80. And then there's the boomers, of which I am a member, proud member, ages 55 to 73, 46 to 64 we were born. And then we have the silent generation, and yes, they are still in the workforce. In fact, I work with one who is in the 80 range and as vibrant and active as she was 30 years ago. So again, just a reference for you so you have a sense for what we're talking about as we move forward. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I want to give you a sense for how our generations differ, their motivators and their preferences. And there's a reason behind doing that. As I mentioned earlier, we want to find ways to collaborate and maximize the benefits of our multi-generational workforce. Now, there's a couple challenges which we're going to talk about, but if we have a sense for what makes some of the generations tick, so to speak, it will help us to lead better, to manage better, to build relationships, to collaborate, and to connect, and to reap the benefits that I'm going to share with you shortly. So the traditionalists, as we call them, they're the greatest generation, as you've heard, I'm sure. They're veterans. And what you're going to notice is that the different generations have been shaped by world events. So they were shaped by the war. They're very loyal employees. World War II and the Great Depression shaped them, and you'll probably know these folks, and you'll hear them talk about these major life events that shaped them, and you can understand why they may do the things that they do. Many of them are our grandparents or our parents. And then we have the baby boomers, and the traditionalists are very focused on how can they add value, how can they make an impact, whereas the baby boom generation is really focused on goals and promotion and having their expertise valued. They prefer, and we're going to talk a lot about communication today, they prefer face-to-face communication. And then Generation X, the forgotten generation, the latchkey children. Many of you are a member of that group. You're used to being independent. That's what shaped your preferences. You work independently. You believe in being advanced based on your competence, not your rank, not your age or seniority. You prefer email and short messages. Now, that doesn't mean you don't hop on the phone or go to someone's office or have face-to-face meetings, but this is your preference. And then we go to the very much talked about millennials or Generation Y. These are a huge percentage of our workforce in 2021. And we have challenges with recruiting and retaining this generation. So it's important to understand what makes them tick. They really value training. And as you have just heard when I did my informal survey, they value mentoring. You will often hear folks say of a different generation, yeah, the millennial generation, they really ask me for feedback frequently. That's their preference. That's their style. They like to do their work in teams. They will have a team and they will collaborate with their team and they will make decisions with the team. They use their team to process, to make decisions, and to have good outcomes. They also like to be connected to a social purpose, a higher purpose, and we use the phrase social impact. They respond to recognition. We all like recognition. It's so important in our workplace, just in general. They respond to recognition and flexible schedules. And we all in the virtual world are realizing what a flexible schedule is like. And some of us enjoy that, and some of us not so much. They like regular informal communication. You probably know they're digitally focused. They like company chat, social networks, texts, and email. And if you have one in your family, like I do, a millennial and a Gen Z, almost everything we do is by text. Gen Z now, they just entered the workforce. In fact, I had some college interns this past spring that I welcomed into my consulting business to give them the opportunity to complete their college requirement, which was an internship, and graduate on time, because the pandemic completely affected the opportunity to get on site into organizations and complete their internship requirements. So they are so impacted by the COVID pandemic. If you have Gen Z in your circle, then you know what I'm talking about. And we don't know yet how that's going to impact them until years down the road. But their preference and their motivators are, again, being attached to a bigger social purpose, social rewards. They value mentorship and meaningful work that makes a difference, that makes an impact. These are our digital natives. They're our most tech savvy at work. They do prefer, surprisingly, face-to-face communication. So again, this is just a guide, not to put any of the generations in a box. This is a starting point if you have decisions or relationships to build for you to refer back to. Okay, next slide, please. So some key facts, key facts about our multi-generational workforce that'll help you as you move forward in your corporations and your organizations and your small businesses, as you recruit and retain and have great business outcomes. Important to note that the over 50 population will be staying in the workforce longer than ever before. You probably see it already, I'm sure you do, with a majority of baby boomers still right now in the workforce. The millennial generation accounts for the largest percentage of workers. In 2020, they became about 50% of the American workforce, and by 2025, they're going to be 75% of the global workforce. So something to think on. We have this big percentage of millennials in the workplace, and we have the baby boomers remaining in the workplace longer. The two huge cohorts that need to work together as time moves forward. Generation Z, as I mentioned, is moving in. They are our youngest generation, graduating high school, graduating college, and they're steadily entering the workforce. It's projected that Gen Z will comprise 27% of the global workforce by 2025. Okay, next slide, please. So again, I said I was going to paint a picture for you of the multi-generational workplace to have a frame of reference as you move forward in your organizations. But this is about digging a little more deeply. This is about age discrimination and age bias in keeping with our age diversity commitment. So what is age bias? We probably all will agree it's treating an applicant or employee less favorably because of his or her age. But there's more to it according to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC.gov, where you can access this information here. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act, ADEA, forbids age discrimination against people who are age 40 or older. As I mentioned earlier, that now covers a percentage of the millennial generation. It does not protect workers under the age of 40, although some states have laws that protect younger workers from age discrimination. It is not illegal for an employer or other covered entity to favor an older worker over a younger worker, even if both workers are age 40 or older. So interesting. Next slide, please. Okay, I do have a question. I just remembered. Jim, I have a question for you. What laws protect older workers? What are some of the basic provisions our audience should be aware of?
Okay, thanks, Mona. You can hear me okay, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Great. So obviously we have the ADEA, but it really came out of an earlier law, and it was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Which was passed by President Johnson, and as the date suggests, it was after John Kennedy's assassination. And many people attribute Kennedy as a real champion of protecting a multitude of discrimination. But the Civil Rights Act of 1964 really developed the protected classifications. Age was one of those classifications, but there were others too, such as race, national origin, gender, disability. And then as time went along, Congress would get together and they would refocus on certain aspects of the protected classifications. The ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, came out. The ADEA came out, I think, in the early 90s. And basically, if you think about it, what a lot of us will focus on are really two things in the employment relationship. We'll focus on hiring and firing or termination. And certainly those two aspects of employment are important and they are covered. But it's really any opportunity that may have a disparate impact on the older workers. And those can be pay. It could also be training and development. It could also be other opportunities. And it's not necessarily the intent of the employer. It is the impact. It's the impact on that age group, the older workers. So we have that. And then there's another law that's on the horizon, and it's gotten tied up in the Senate. but it has more bipartisan support now, so it may come out. And that's the Protection of Older Workers Age Discrimination Act, POWADA. Now, at the end, we'll go through some key takeaways, and this is really one of them because there's a simple concept that I'll mention because right now the ADEA doesn't really afford the opportunity for a mixed motive impact, meaning that if you have other legitimate reasons for either terminating or impacting an older worker, that may help you, and it may deny that that claimant whatever they're seeking. But what Congress is looking to do is to broaden that playing field and say, no, you know what? If it doesn't have to be just age, age could be one of the factors, that, and we're still going to take a look at it. So we'll see how that goes. The only other one that I'll mention quickly is the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, and that was developed because there were either 401k or pension plans or health insurance plans, and they had a disparate impact on the older worker. And that could be like an age-weighted 401k plan. The formula gets better for younger workers, that kind of thing. So I think there are a number of things, but basically ADEA really does focus on age. And I'll turn it back to you, Mona.
Thank you, Jim. That was really helpful information. The impact versus intent was really fascinating. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so AARP is a great resource on this topic, and they did a workplace survey, and I do have all the resources that we used in this presentation available to you at the end of the program if you want to take a deeper look at some of the information. The AARP Workplace Survey 2018 saw that nearly 2 out of 3 workers ages 45 and older have seen or experienced age discrimination on the job. Among the 61% of those respondents who reported age bias, 91% said that they believe such discrimination is common. Now, it's interesting, and I think really helpful that this conversation is happening today, because when we go out and we talk about the multi-generational workplace and we don't talk about age bias, people will bring it up to us. People will bring it up and say that they feel it, they believe it's common, and they're actually very brave in doing so. So very interesting information. Next slide, please. Okay, Jim, I'm going to turn this over to you, please, at this time.
Okay, thanks, Mona.
Sure.
So the next few slides I'll cover, everyone, and really we're trying to, some of these statistics will show why there are older workers in the workplace. It goes towards the employer, maybe some of the expectations about the applicant pool for any particular job. So we'll get there, but I'm going to start with just some Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Now, there is this phenomenon of older individuals staying in or re-entering the workforce. And there's a number of reasons for that, which you can see on the slide. But I'll mention right off the bat, though, that something that has impacted this pretty significantly since this data was published is the pandemic. And the workers age 55 and over were really disproportionately impacted, not only by their health and the fatality rate, which is pretty alarming, but also by the fact that they were in jobs that were most likely to be furloughed or wouldn't have the ability to work remotely. And so this is a group that is starting to trickle back into the workforce. So I think the data is still valid. And really, if you think about our population, and I think back to my parents and my grandparents, I think I feel like I'm generally healthier, and hopefully I have a longer life expectancy now, which thankfully statistics will support. And then for people in my age group, and as it trails off to the younger generation, Social Security benefits are not, I'm eligible for them, but I would take a pretty big haircut if I tried to start it earlier. And then back after like 1974 and in the late 70s, traditional pensions started to disappear. They were frozen or terminated by a lot of employers after there were tighter regulations through the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. And so gradually, employers shifted responsibility to what we see today, which is really it's on us. It's on us as employees to save either outside of a 401k plan or within a 401k or a 403b. And so that responsibility has shifted. And, you know, I think we have varying levels of responsibility in terms of our personal savings and how much we contribute. And some of the statistics there are pretty alarming. But about half of the private sector workers aged 25 to 64, they don't even have an employer-sponsored plan of any type. And if you think about it, the smaller an employer gets, the more difficult it is to justify financially whether it's health benefits or whether it is retirement benefits. And so interestingly enough, we'll get into some of these statistics. I have a little bit more here. Hang on a second. Yeah, some additional stats. So hang on a second. I have trouble here. There. Okay. So as Mona mentioned earlier, we have this dynamic that's occurring now that is different and than it has been in the past. And it's this where the demographic splits occur and how much of the workforce is staying on or coming back into the workforce, and how the growth in the older workers is really growing at a disproportionate level to the younger workers. And I'll talk about the point of all this in a minute. But you can see some of these statistics, particularly with women in the workplace, and they're twice as many over 55 as by 2024 as women in the 16 to 24 cohort. So it's really interesting to see how this may all play out for employers as they look to fill positions. And that's really the point of this. Let me move on to the next slide. This is just the graph. It's an older graphic, but it's interesting. I think it still applies, and you can just see visually how the green bars are growing, particularly in the 65 to 74 and ages 75 plus. You may say, well, 75 plus, how's that impact the workforce? As we talked about earlier, there are people that are still in the workforce at that older age, and they just haven't saved enough for retirement. So interestingly enough, if you were to think about it, and these stats are always kind of published and they're a bit shocking, but if you think about what would be the average retirement savings for different age groups, and for the under age 35 group, it's $13,000. That's the average. And sure, there's a number of years for that to grow into more significant savings, but it is a bit alarming that it's that low, and some of the impacts are students that have significant student debt. The cost of living is higher, wages have stagnated over time, and so then when you start to look at some of the later ages, it's still not that great. It's I think $128,000 for somebody between the ages of 55 and 64, and the average for a 65-year-old taking Social Security is something like $1,500 a month. So if you project all that out, and if you add in their personal savings, it's not quite poverty level, but it's very low. And the point being that we are going to see people in the workforce for quite some time at an older age, and what's happening is employers are having difficulty filling jobs regardless of the age group. There's still some age discrimination going on, and that even with the research that age doesn't necessarily predict ability or performance, employers fall back on ageist stereotypes that the ADEA was enacted to prohibit. And then you have this kind of 50-year mark of legislation and the trail of legislation around this. And it's still very, very common to see age discrimination in the workforce. And so I think, the point here is that if you're going out to find workers, you need to fill jobs, the pool of talent that you may consider, more desirable may have shrunken, and the older worker population has grown. And so you might have to make some adjustments to your strategy and take a look at some of the older workers. And I think some of the things that are, if you've ever posted a job and said, hey, this is a fun workplace, or you do things to try to attract that younger age talent, that's where some of that can get you into trouble. We'll cover that a little bit later. But I wanted to also just bring out some things that in as far as age discrimination goes and hiring in that older worker classification. So this question pops up. So if somebody needs to fill a job and they're projecting they need somebody in the role for 5 years, would it be legally permissible to rule out a 63-year-old applicant? On its face, the answer is yes, it would. If you're basing it solely on the age of the individual, and the assumption being, well, at 65, they're probably going to retire. And that may not be the case. And there may be other things that are disclosed in an interview that would rule that person out. For example, if they self-disclosed and they said, yeah, I just want you to know, I want to be transparent up front that I'm out at 65 and I'm going to retire and go into my golden years. If you need someone for 5 years, you're going to think, that person may not fit the bill for this job. Still, I think you do run some risk if you're basing that decision on age. The other thing is that if you're going to assume that somebody 63 years old is not going to work for 5, 6, 7 years, they're in a classification of workers that has demonstrated, as Mona said earlier, that they do work longer. They do value their employment. Whereas, it's a stereotype about the millennial generation is that they job hop. And there are statistics out there that show that they stay in a role maybe 4 years, 4+ years. So if you were going to go look at a younger applicant pool, you might be surprised in 4+ years that person is leaving. It may not fill the 5 years. I don't want to stereotype, but it is something that has been researched, and the data is out there. So I'm going to move on to the next slide and just go through this quickly. I don't want to overburden you with statistics, but basically the thing is about liability for age discrimination. The thing that second bullet around $30,000 per resolution, you have to understand that you really can't rely on that too much, because with a smaller size employer, that settlement or recovery amount is probably going to be lower. It's probably going to be higher for this company like Jet Propulsion, a large company that it was a $10 million settlement. And when these settlements or litigation verdicts occur, they're generally higher than if you go through a conciliation process and you settle earlier in the process. And also if you're a smaller employer. But the other thing that happened to this company, they had to do other things to make sure that they were in agreement that the EOC was in agreement with them. This 3-year consent decree to prevent other workplace discrimination, for example, they have to hire an EEO monitor and a diversity director and layoff coordinator. Excuse me, my voice is really... Okay, I think I have it back now. But the point of this slide really is to say that you could face some serious liability if age discrimination is proven. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to you, Mona, and get my voice back.
Thank you, Jim. That was really helpful, useful information and important information. Thank you so much. So we are sharing these hard facts because of the significance they have on your workplace and on your employer and on your career. So just bear with me. I have just a couple more here. Hard facts on age bias in the workplace. About 33% of people believe their age is putting their job at risk. That means that's their perception, that they think that, whether it's true or not, that's how they're thinking. 58% of workers in their 50s or older have experienced age discrimination. They will tell you that, 58% of them. Of the people who experience this bias, 95% see it as common in the workplace. Employees age 50 plus are known as being the most engaged and the most experienced, however. And over the past 25 years, the percent of workers age 55 plus has doubled and rising, as Jim and I have both shared. They're delaying retirement because of the financial piece of this, as Jim pointed out really, really well. However, there's another piece of this, and that older generations are redefining what retirement means. They want to travel. They want to spend more time going after work that is in line with their purpose in life. And they just have really nothing else to do that lights them up as much. So they're saying, I'm not going to retire. And I, working in aging, I see this often. Next slide, please.
I think we have a poll question for everyone.
I don't see it.
Yeah, I think.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Age bias against older workers is common in today's workplace. We have a polling question for you, and the answer A, true, B, false. Just take a moment, please. Another 10 seconds. Okay, so pretty significant, 77% think it's true. Okay, next slide, please. So a recent survey by Glassdoor, 2019 Diversity Inclusion Survey said this: age bias is not just for the older employee. Age bias affects the younger employee even more. According to this survey, younger employees, 52% of ages 18 to 34, said that they're more likely than older employees, 39% of those age 55 plus, to have witnessed or experienced ageism. So you might have heard, oh, I'm not going to connect with that person in that generation because they don't have so much experience under their belt. Or we dismiss ideas because they're brand new in the industry. We might even refer to them as kids, because we might have kids that age. So we are not recognizing the contribution, according to this survey, that they offer. Next slide, please. So my point in sharing some of these hard facts is this: the age-diverse workforce has multiple benefits that are backed by research, by SHRM, by HBR, by Forbes, etc. And the benefits of an age-diverse workforce can be enjoyed by making a few adjustments. But first, let me share what they are, and then I'm going to give you some tips to maximize these benefits. First, we see increased productivity. I think it was Forbes that did a survey that showed a 77% productivity increase when they had their age-diverse workforce collaborating. We talk about innovation and we talk about problem solving. Having differing perspectives at the table has been helpful in problem solving. And the next slide I'm going to show you will dig a little more deeply into that. And then we talk about improving recruitment and retention. We have a job issue right now, people not being in the workforce, and there's great need. So how do we improve recruitment and retention of our age-diverse workforce? By understanding what they need, by understanding what their preferences are. I had a CEO about a year ago say to me that they wanted to recruit more millennials into the organization. And the question was, would it be okay to advertise in the newspaper? And the answer was no, because the money that you invest, the time and the outcome would not be what you would be desiring to have as your outcome. The best use of your resources would be to meet the millennials and the Gen Zs where they are. And we know where they are. They're on digital social media. They're on LinkedIn. They're on Facebook. So we know that these are areas that we can recruit the younger generation. So it's important to understand. And then the retention piece, as I mentioned earlier, there are things that the millennial and Gen Z generation value. And I suggest to clients that we meet them where they are. They want to learn from the older generation, and it's our opportunity to make sure that the knowledge and experience that we've acquired over the years gets passed on to the next generation. And then to maximize these benefits, we must look at business growth. Like, how does this impact your business's opportunity to grow? When I say that it does, it does. And I'll give you another example here, a professional example of my own. I was working with a regional manager of a senior care product, let me say that. And this person had hired a millennial to do business development for the organization. And the CEO told me that she overheard a conversation with the new hire and a senior. And the younger generation person was very focused on selling the benefits of the product, which anyone in business development knows that's important to do. Selling the benefits, telling them how they could sign up, telling them how much it would cost. But there was a huge disconnect because, as the CEO and I discussed, that millennial didn't understand what that senior silent generation, greatest generation needed. And what that communication is for that older generation is they want to be listened to. They have a lot of concerns. Imagine your aging parent or your aging loved one. There's concerns. They have questions. But the millennial didn't understand that and would have been more effective in terms of a greater profitability or greater outcome had that communication adjustment been made. So we want to maximize the benefits of our age-diverse workforce, and we're going to share a little bit about how you might be able to do that. So next slide, please. So we did say that innovation comes from these diverse minds, from these age-diverse minds. And I love this quote from a Forbes article. It was called "The Diversity Employers Need to Remember, Age Diversity." When we mix the different strengths and perspectives of younger and older workers, we gain the benefits of diversity of thought. And that is proven to result in better decision-making, problem-solving, and innovation. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? So this is our starting point. We only have a few more minutes, so I kind of have to go through it quickly. And feel free to reach out to me and I can dig more deeply into these two solution-focused areas for you. So the two challenges that we face frequently are stereotypes, as Jim referred to a little bit ago, and the communication disconnect. So let's start with stereotyping. Next slide, please. So we've all heard them. We've all heard these before and more. Baby boomers don't know how to use technology. Gen X workers, they just want to get ahead. Millennials are self-centered. Gen Z workers don't have interpersonal skills. And that's just the beginning. You know, we've heard okay boomer. That's not too long ago, a New York Times article. And then just last week, now it's okay Zoomer. We've learned that the Gen Z population completely dislike email. And what's that going to mean to our communication? So next slide, please. So there are generational differences. And as leaders and as managers, We want to know what they are. We want to recognize them. We want to appreciate, navigate, and respect them. In general, it's acceptable to acknowledge and appreciate the different generational groups, that they are going to have these preferences, they're going to have these norms and these habits. And we, as leaders and managers, it's in our best interest to meet them where they are and to be aware of how we can move past the stereotyping. And we'll talk about that in the next slide, please. So this refers here, communication credibility and stereotyping, to the written word. We're Zooming now, some of us are using the phone. We're not so much face-to-face like we were, but the written word, email, we are using that right now during the pandemic, and everyone has a different communication style from a different generation. Someone might prefer long, lengthy emails. Someone might prefer, as I mentioned earlier, text. Some of the younger generations, you'll notice they don't use punctuation. And the message here is that there is different generational preferences, and we need to acknowledge that there are preferences and styles. And if you as a leader or a manager need something different, then we need to put the expectation out for that. We need to be clear about what we would like. And when we're not sure what someone else would like in terms of written communication or verbal communication especially, we just simply ask, what's your preference for getting in touch with you? It's very simple. We ask. Okay, next slide, please. I'm watching our time here. Okay, so generational stereotypes. How do we move past this block that we've all experienced? Have the question, have you or someone you know experienced an age-based stereotype? I'm assuming you have. And if so, think about, if you experienced it yourself, how have you overcome it? How have you made adjustments to overcome? And I can tell you, in being a baby boomer, one of the things I work hard at is staying current and keeping up with technology. And that helps, and that's important. That's required of the market. So that's, how I move past that. So think about that. How do you overcome it? You can overcome it. So then we have another polling question for you. And the question is, I have either personally experienced age discrimination or know someone who has. A, true, B, false. If you could take a moment, please, and answer that, that would be great. Like 10 seconds. Okay. If we could go, the poll is ended and we'll see our results. Okay, a significant percentage have said yes. And again, we have to point out that it's with older generations and younger generations. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so overcoming these generational stereotypes, we just need to be aware of our own biases. We need to check in. As leaders, we grow our leadership capacity by improving our self-awareness. And this is an area where you can really overcome generational issues in your workplace. If you check in with yourself, be self-aware about your own biases and your own negative assumptions about any generation. And then, as I said earlier, this information is a starting point for us. It's a guide for us. After we've got some sense of our direction with the different generations and how we want to move forward, we need to get to know people for who they are. We need to move past these guides that I'm sharing with you today, and we need to individualize. We need to seek deeper connection by getting to know people, know the individual, and again, just use the generational styles as a guide and not to put different generations in a box. So next slide, please. I'm watching my time. We have a question for Jim. If left unaddressed, how can different communication styles between generations cause potential liability for employers?
Oh, thank you, Mona. Hi again, everybody. I'll try to not be so hoarse my voice. I don't know what happened there, but anyway, so I'd say there's two types of liability. There's financial liability or financial detriment, and legal. I think the legal part is a little less prevalent here, but it could create issues. And I think we saw some of this with the pandemic, and there may have been workers in the older age groups. I don't want to stereotype, but there could have been that weren't comfortable with the technology of webinars, WebExes, virtual meetings. If that persisted and people were left out, missed opportunities, et cetera, on a broader scale, sure, could someone bring a claim for that? And based on disparate treatment, yes, they certainly could. But I think communication, as Mona pointed out, if certain things persist, productivity could be the type of liability we're talking about, or the lack thereof, and frustration and turnover. All those things can be a detriment to the employer. I think where somebody persists deliberately, let's say they always use long emails, they know that it is something that younger workers don't appreciate, or vice versa. If younger workers use cryptic emails and they know it's not appreciated and the employer doesn't do anything about it, I think it's relatively remote, but it could happen.
Thank you so much, Jim. Very important. Okay, so we are going to hop into the communication area for the remainder of our program here. So according to a recent survey, 84% of millennials and 77% of boomers want open communication, that it was a top priority in the workplace, considering these are your two largest cohorts in the workplace right now. And they are asking and requiring open communication. This is where we can really collaborate, build, and maximize those benefits that I mentioned earlier: innovation and productivity, recruitment, retention, and business growth. And I can't take the deep dive that I would normally take with you to show you how you're going to maximize that, but I can give you some really helpful pointers that you can practice today. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so think about the communication challenges within your multi-generational workforce. You know that your digital folks are your millennials and your Gen Zs. They prefer tweets and texts. Your traditionalists and baby boomers are comfortable with phone calls and face-to-face. How can we bring these different generational views of communication into focus? And what adjustments, if any, would we make? So I can just share with you that, being that I study this, I am very aware of the preferences and differences. And I personally try to meet the different generations where they are. I work with all generations and I love it. And so it's natural for me to do that. But in my work, it's what I do. So it's expected that I know, how to connect with these folks. But it might be harder for some people to do that. And you might not remember what was on the chart. So I want you to think about intention. What are you trying to accomplish when you're connecting with different generations? What's the outcome that you desire? And what adjustments can you make to help you get to your desired outcome more easily? Okay, so here we go, bridging the communication divide. This is a very brief overview of what we can do. First, we have to know our audience, know our generation. If you're going to do a public presentation, you obviously want to know who you're speaking to. Is it going to be your executive team? Is it going to be one of your management teams? Is it going to be your shift workers? So you know your audience, and you want to know what their preferences are. You want to know what issues that are impacting them. It's the same, that's like public presentation. You need to know your generations also. There's going to be a disconnect if you don't. You're going to try to relationship build, you're going to try to connect, but if you don't know what their preferences are and their styles, you're probably going to miss the mark. And there's really simple ways that you can get to know the different generations and dig into this individuality that we spoke about a few seconds ago. So number one communication tip for all of us is to find similarities, find commonalities. If you're sitting next to a different generation and you hear them playing a certain kind of music, or you're hearing that they're going to a specific concert, or hearing the Lehigh Valley the day after we all go to Music Fest, all the generations are talking about all the different venues that they attended. And, music is something that everyone's connecting on, and we have commonalities, and we have relationship building, and trust is starting to build. So simple to find commonalities. We can always do it. If you're in someone's office, which I know is not too common right now, you can peruse the room and, see what sports team someone likes, see what, maybe do they have children? Do they have grandchildren? What's on their walls where they went to school, and did you know someone that maybe went to that school? That's how we open up these relationships amongst the different generations. And actually this applies to any relationship building, networking that you do in your work life. So the next piece is this, and it's super important, and I just want to mention real quickly, there was a study out of UCLA that was super important, and it looked at words, tone of voice, and body language. And right now in our virtual world, this is so important for all of us to consider. What we say actually only accounts for 7% of what is believed. The way we say it, the way we say our communication accounts for 38% of what is believed. What others see in this virtual world of ours accounts for 55%. So our nonverbal communication, especially right now in this virtual world, is so important so that we can connect across the generations. And we want to pay attention to our nonverbals, and we want to listen to other nonverbals. And this is a wonderful way to bridge that divide. So pay attention to body language, tone of voice, eye contact, facial expressions. You can learn so much about how you're impacting another generation. So that was very brief. And if you would like more information about that, please reach out to me. By focusing on overcoming stereotypes, understanding communication styles, and providing access to training, we can reduce age biases in the workplace. And with the information and facts that we've presented today, it's in our best interest to do so in our workforce. Next slide, please. So some of the best practices for managers with their managing their multi-generational teams is have an abundance of training opportunities, encourage upskilling, encourage trainings, encourage job shadowing. So in my leadership consulting business, we talk about strengths. We need to put people, different generations, working in their strength zones. We need about 70% of people with 70% of their people with working in their strength zones, excuse me. So it's a unique mix of skills and experience that each team member, age diversity brings to us. Understand the differences in communication styles, text, chat, ask when in doubt, be clear about what you need if it's not working for you, create opportunities for age diverse groups to collaborate, mix up the ages on your teams, working on projects. And then another opportunity for all of us is super, super popular right now. It's called co-mentoring or reverse mentoring, where we pair different age groups and we allow them to really support one another, maybe technology, information, some leadership skilling. It's a wonderful program. You can set it up in your organization. Reverse mentoring, co-mentoring, highly, highly beneficial. Okay, next slide. So to wrap up, I do this in many of my communication trainings and my generational trainings. When I first started out in my company about 6 years ago, I did this in a diverse age presentation. And the following week, I got the opportunity to share the impact of everyone's gratitude notes with one another. And a young man said to all of us, or about 12 of us, that he had written a gratitude note to someone that mentored him from another generation, thanked him for all that he had done for him. The gentleman who received the gratitude note called this young man and thanked him, that it meant so much to him. And then this young man in my training went on to say that 2 weeks later, this gentleman had passed away. And there was silence in the room. You could have heard a pin drop and no one said a word. And from then on, the gratitude note took on a deeper meaning. It means something, and it helps us connect with other generations. And someone from another generation most likely did make an impact on our careers. I know for me, it has. I was a student at Marywood, and my college professor today, fast forward 20 something years, is my boss in the School of Business. So think about writing a gratitude note to someone that has made a difference for you in another generation. And I would love to hear how that went for you. So that's it for me, Jim. These are just some of the resources that I mentioned earlier, and you will be getting them if you want to have a deeper dive here. So thank you, everybody. This was really an honor. I hope this was helpful.
Thanks, Mona. And we're a little past 2. I should be able to wrap this up in a few minutes. So I encourage you to stay on for these takeaways. But obviously, if you got a hard stop, we understand, and we thank you for joining us today. Okay, so I think this first bullet is relatively obvious, but we all do this. We all make these assumptions, whether it's someone who's applying for a position and you see like 30 years of experience, you're only asking for 5 to 7 or 7 to 10. There's almost an immediate reaction, at least for me, and I try to overcome that. I mean, after all, I'm in that 30 plus category, so even I do that. I mean, we really have to try to push through that and give the applicant a chance, or give current employees a chance to make a difference. Also have opportunities and not stereotype. The other thing is the more age-biased language in job postings, and can be subtle. It can be more obvious. I even heard of one company that had a drop-down box in their application, and it only had certain age ranges. And if mine wasn't on there, I couldn't answer the question. So that was kind of sneaky. The other thing is that don't, as I said before, assume that a younger pool of applicants will be waiting for your job posting. Remember that the BLS statistics on those projections for different age demographics. I think it's difficult enough to find workers now in many industries, and I think the larger applicant pool in the future is going to be older workers. So age discrimination claims are on the rise. Generally, right now, you would see that harassment claims are number one. Then you would have gender claims, sex discrimination, race, national origin come in there, and then it's age. But that is changing over time, and workers are not as passive anymore about just kind of dismissing discrimination when they're adversely impacted. And then remember that mixed motive claims under the ADA might be forthcoming. This may sound like a real technical issue, but it could even spike that trend even higher, because right now the burden of proof is on the employee to establish the claim, and it's on the employee to show that it was only age that was considered under the ADEA. In the future, that's going to be different. There could be other factors, but age could be one of them. So just keep that in mind. And then make sure your EEO statement and the related documents, handbook, language, things like that, are up to date. And you might even want to scour those for age-biased language that might be in there. And it's just make sure those documents are in place and they're up to date. And then consider implementing annual mandatory discrimination prevention training. It could be that you do sexual harassment training, and you may weave other discriminatory aspects into that training, or you could do a discrimination 101, and it could include a variety of discrimination topics in that training, but make it mandatory, just like maybe your safety training is, or some other training that you have. So those would be my suggestions to make sure that you're covering your bases and you're minimizing your liability, maximizing your compliance. So that's all I have. I did see one question that I'll address, and I think I addressed it earlier, but somebody had asked whether it was okay to ask for somebody's age in an employment interview. And yeah, here's the thing about that. You want to avoid that. You may have a separate process outside of the interview that asks for date of birth. We all have that in our either applications or the onboarding documentation. And that's important as part of a data set. But just flat out asking somebody their age, the next question from the applicant might be, why do you need to know? And that might be very difficult for you to answer and maybe awkward. So I would say no, I would not ask for age during an interview. And there are some aspects of other discrimination that I won't go into in detail, but for example, if you were to just say something like, oh, you live over there, that's in the St. Andrews Parish, right? And that applicant might just get kind of put off by that as you digging for whether they are Catholic or some other religion. So you have to be really careful in interviews, and I would say, no, I wouldn't ask that question. But I think that's it. Put the slide back up. And if you need to reach out to us, please do. We'd welcome any questions you have. And we want to thank you both. Mona, if you're still active with your audio, if you wanted to say anything in closing, but I'm just thankful we had a good audience today. And thanks for sticking with us as we went over time.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the value you added to our presentation, Jim. Thank you so much. And thank you to your team, and thank you to all the attendees. And if I can be a resource for you, any of the attendees here, please email me at mdelsole1@gmail.com. I'm more than happy, if you have questions that arose after our presentation. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. We'll sign off now. Have a great rest of your day.